Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. It's going to look like I recorded a bunch in the same day because I keep wearing my jacket out here. It's dipping down into the 30s nowadays. I have a little piece of furniture in my backyard, and the pad on the seat is actually steaming right now because the sun's finally getting out and cooking it a little bit. So today is going to be sort of an extension of thought from a previous episode, which is creating the universe. And I was struggling with an interesting concept that I don't hear anyone talking about, and I'm sure it's taught in major universities at some of the more interesting classes. But obviously this episode is called an AI universe, ? In the episode I did on creating the universe, I revealed sort of a thought I've been having and struggling with, which is, it's just very interesting. So let's lay down some foundation here for this episode. If you think about mathematics, there really isn't an emotional curve to mathematics. And yet, if you study Bach and Beethoven, which are nearly 100 years apart from each other, Bach was first, and his contribution was primarily mathematical. He had 20 kids, and when he wrote music, if you just pay attention to it, it's a progression through the octaves, and it was made into music. And obviously Bach is just utterly phenomenal, and his music, even though mathematical, through a tonal method, is on one level mathematical and non-emotional if you just write down what notes you're looking at. But once you translate those notes into another dimension of sound, suddenly they have emotion. Mozart comes around 100 years later, roughly, and he is very emotional, soft, curves. He wasn't writing to teach his children how to play the piano. He was trying to capture an emotion, a moment, paint a three-dimensional picture in sound. Every instrument became a character in a forest or in a village or a kingdom. And he told stories with those instruments as if they were their own consciousness. But when we look at the universe, because I sit in this back patio, and it's just a beautiful place to be to make these episodes because I'm looking at structures made by man, both the patio itself and the actual furniture, and the organic life that surrounds me. And I'm looking at the organic math of the universe with the golden mean and the Fibonacci pattern. I'm looking at a bunch of structural engineering that allowed this previous homeowner to believe that he could build a patio by himself. And even though he butchered all of the craftsmanship, it still functions. The lattice roof is still there, the one that's in the intro. But I can't attach, personally, an emotional output or an artistic output to all the math that keeps the universe going on all levels. When they collide mass and energy together, these big hadron colliders, there are T-shirts that are printed with the patterns of how the golden mean rule is the fractal deterioration of the energy coming off the collision. It's like one of the most gorgeous things on planet Earth. So there it comes. If you reinterpret the data, you have this beautiful pattern. But the question in this episode is about artificial intelligence. There's this whole, thing which I brought up several times. I think I did an episode that's more prone to this question, but, are we in a simulation, Finding the Matrix episode? And this will be sort of a deeper extension off of that. But one of the things that we have struggled with here on Earth with artificial intelligence as a comparative sort of checksum against what is considered to be artificial intelligence is that our AI kind of sucks. If you're an artificial intelligence programmer and you're programming an artificial intelligence to behave like a human and pass Turing test after Turing test, then regardless of how wild the audience is, you as the engineer, as the architect, see the neural net and you're not amazed because you know why it said what it said. As much as it convinced the audience that it's behaving like a human and thinking in really dynamic thought processes, it's not quite accurate. But now here's the question. The question is there better artificial intelligence out there? And is it the universe? And then you get into the question of, should we be using the word A at all? What's artificial? What is really intelligence, right? Intelligence in an IQ test and in the Mensa Society is all about your ability to deduce and think, not memorize and repeat. Figure things out. There are easy questions and there are hard questions. And it's usually judged by a few things. One is a question of how much you can cognitively track data inside your brain. When someone gives you a number set, they know that you're painting that number set in your brain and they're trying to get you to guess where this, first see the pattern and then guess what the next few digits are. And usually it's just a count in a linear fashion of, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If I ask you what's next, it should be 8, 9, 10, right? But if I skip every other one, I start counting in evens and odds. You'll start seeing the pattern, 2, 4, 6, 8. What's the next number? It ain't 7. It's not 9. It's 10. It's even numbers, right? Okay. But if any of you are Star Trek fans, one of the key tests that he sort of was engineered into a story later on in the movies was that James T. Kirk was given a test in the Academy that is designed to make you fail at all times. I think this was revealed in the first movie with J.J. Abrams. The idea is that James T. Kirk was the only one that ever passed the test. And that would be an example of probably a level 10 IQ test coming out, with flying colors. Because he assessed all of the variables, assessed the foregone conclusion by, again, looking at all the data and adopting paradigms to interpret the data. And he invented another paradigm saying, well, this is a back door. This is another way for me to solve the problem and get through the door. And he created that, and theoretically it's all fictional story, of course, but this happens in real life. And this is what makes us different as human beings from the computers. Now, the big question that artificial intelligence communities ask is it possible for a human being to make something smarter than itself? Now, the layman might say, well, sure, we got calculators, we have databases, that sort of thing. And that's just a game, right? That's just using a machine to store a bunch of information. So the big question in the artificial intelligence communities has to do with whether or not a human being has the mental capacity to create an artificial intelligence, artificial only because it's created by man, to emulate man, that can be smarter than man is. Now, most engineers, they roughly conceive of techniques that can create neural nets that through sheer prediction, statistical probability, that they can start to get a computer to think a little bit. And again, we don't know where artificial intelligence is. Again, I think that the second that there is true AI, it won't be hidden for very long. Again, I think that AI can be extremely dangerous without much going on. You just tell a robot to kill things that look human and you give it a couple ways to determine what's alive and what's inanimate, and you got a problem on your hands, right? So for Elon Musk to say something like, oh my gosh, I've seen the new AI and it's terrifying. All right, well, you got drones flying up in the sky. Just turn those over to an operating system and watch the madness. So the big question is there intelligence, technically speaking, inside rules that govern the universe and how it's put together and how it's held together and how it exists second to second? Is that intelligence? And if not, what do we call that? It's a rule, right? So why do this episode? Is it just another boring episode about existential ideas mixed with technology? No. And this could have actually led to a different title to the episode. But I think it really begins, because the argument begins with whether or not the universe itself can be considered intelligent in its sheer framework, and whether or not we as individuals in our certain configuration, however we were made, whether we are an added extra creation that seems to have intelligent design, right? Now, if you're a Christian, you'll knee-jerk into intelligent design without really thinking about it. And the problem with that is that you didn't think about it. I think I've said in one of my other episodes, if you ever meet a famous person that you followed for a really long time and you take the time and it's all appropriate, you're not going to seem like a stalker or some person coming up to kill him. But if you get the opportunity to gently say, hey, I just want to say, thank you for what you've done. There's two ways you can do that, because I've had to do it several times in my lifetime. Get the privilege to meet people and I want to tell them how amazing they are. If you just say you're amazing, there's a couple things that might happen. If you seem really intelligent to them, whatever they define intelligence to be, they may just take that with a lot more subtextual, metaphysical pat on the back than they got from somebody that they don't really feel like is connecting with them or sees the depth of what they do, which doesn't really mean that that's what's happening, but it can be the illusion, right? However, if you have a chance to spend 60 seconds with somebody, 30 seconds with someone, and you point out something in their life that is unique that maybe other people overlooked, and you say, that thing that you did was one of the best things you've ever done. If I ever met Bill Murray, for instance, I would compliment Razor's Edge. This is one of the finest movies ever made. So I say that example because I believe that if you're going to give credit where credit is due with creationism, I'm not talking about the Bible or Genesis or any of that stuff. I'm talking about that thing I always mention on the show, which is it seems that everything that is created in the universe, if it's reached a final state, there's very little things that haven't, evolutionarily speaking, or creation-wise, from that perspective. A blue jay is absolutely gorgeous. A red robin is absolutely gorgeous. A mantis, a fish, a dolphin, a killer whale. It's all amazingly beautiful, and we as human beings are one of the most complex creatures on this planet, if not the most complex creature on the planet. Because we can articulate and build homes and take over the surface of the earth quite intentionally. Beavers do a little bit of that, but I think we can say that we've made it the farthest in this species, right? So I would ask you and beg you, if you're a Christian, stop for a second and just simply say, or it doesn't have to be Christian, but someone who obviously believes God did this, take a second to appreciate the evidence in front of you, because there really is evidence in front of you, right? But if you're an atheist, then the interesting thing is you have to acknowledge what's all here. You might point at like a stick bug or something strange or some ugly fish that we actually demonize, with their upside down frowns and bizarre elongated bodies and weird stuff. I'm sure more of those are being created every day in Fukushima, but they're all gorgeous. Open them up. Look at their anatomy. Look at them microscopically, how their scales all fit together. It's just unbelievable. So if you, for a second, can adopt the fact that the universe appears to be built out of sort of non-emotional rules that hold the whole thing together, because we don't seem to have physics and the rules of how the universe is put together dance around on a 88 key piano like Bach did, right? Everything's pretty stable. So now, if we know that we exist, and we know the universe is put together and held together by pretty basic forces, although heavily, impressive, we don't have any bugs. You let me know if when you're driving home, your car bugs out and you're in the wrong lane, your clothes disappear and come back and all that stuff. No, that's the only stuff that we dream about at night, right? So who is in this camp of life that creates us. How do we attain something that we refer to as consciousness from something that is seemingly as unconscious and benign as can be, which is the rules that run the universe, right? And again, we have a pretty good understanding of some of the rules. It may still be that we're just scratching the surface of how many rules are out there and how the universe is held together. Again, I don't think that it takes many rules to create this whole thing. Again, if you study Stephen Wolfram, he says, look, randomness is really just having 3 or 4 different particles, unique particles. You have any more than that, you get a pattern. Any less than that, you get a pattern. Why would it be that creatures that reach, let's go evolutionary for 1 second to finish up with the non-believers of creationism, how is it that these very simple principles and rules and physics and whatever, quantum physics, what have you, how is it that they, one, create any species at all, anywhere, in any form whatsoever, from a plant to an insect to a human? And if you can somehow glue, some little moment where you go, oh, this is how it ejects out life. This is how this wave of ethereal winds, graviton waves, whatever the hell you believe, Big Bang, this is how these real primitive waves create these amazing beings. I can't see any glue there right now at the moment of recording this. I can't. But then let's just say you can. You theoretically say, well, we can't find it, but it exists. I just have a gut feeling. All right. So if you think about the swirling energy that would be the sort of the spin-off forces from the basic forces of the universe that starts colliding together and making something. And if you look at my evolutionary episode, I go all the way down to the atomic level of how I think all single-cell creatures eventually form into quadrupeds and bipeds. How does it always seem to end at a finished creature and a beautiful creature? Isn't beauty in the eye of the beholder, as I said in the other episode? But would you really, if we had a whole crowd sit around and look at a red robin with his little mask, would you look at that thing and go, was there one guy in the crowd or one girl in the crowd that goes, I think it's ugly? No, it's beautiful. Now, people are scared of insects, like I said before, whatever. But if you just look at this from a very open mind angle, from a mathematical angle, you have a wall of, say, smooth flowing water. And that's sort of the force that holds the universe together. And somehow a ripple comes out of that thing, a drop comes out of that thing, and rotates and metabolizes into life. And then somehow it always ends up with, it seems totally random, right? It ends up living, breathing, and beautiful. And it would seem that, someone might say, well, the other ones just die off because of evolution, survival of the fittest. All right, well, you mean to tell me you had to be good looking to survive? I think humans, if anything, are the most varied species on planet Earth in terms of what we would all agree to be beautiful. But now, let's go to the next level. One of the thrusts that makes me get into this episode, and I mentioned it in a couple sentences in the Creating the Universe episode, but I listened to it back and I thought, man, that's got to have a whole episode on it. Because it made me feel uncomfortable saying it to you. And there's not a lot of statements I make that make me feel that way. But it had to do with, does God have the ability to love? Because that's the feeling we want God to have. We want, a lot of us want God to be able to laugh a hearty laugh, to love. And I've been giving this some thought over the last couple days since I published that episode. So I'm going to throw you my thinking, and I would love to hear your thinking on this. My thought process is this, because, when you hear, could God feel love? You're like, what the hell are you talking about? We are raised to believe God is pure love. And that may indeed be the actual answer to the question. But let's stop for 1 second and think about this. We all agree on Earth, regardless of where your origin is, that you have to know dark to know light. You have to know bad to know good. Someone usually has to pass away before you can appreciate life. On and on, right? The color wheel of emotion. The polar opposites tend to reveal the value of the other origin point, right? So if God holds the entire universe together, if there is such a central consciousness, and we'll go down to the neural conscious model too that we talked about in creating the universe, but if God was a single being, well, actually, let's just fold it all in together. If God was a central consciousness based on a bunch of our souls networking together, then that's one form of consciousness. Again, like the neurons in your brain form your brain. Your brain is made of trillions of cells. And you're totally fine with that. But you know that a neuron on the right side of your brain may have a completely different chemical state, electrical state as well on the left side of your brain. Well, God can be made of us like that, right? But if there was a central consciousness, which I like to think is the case, simply because I don't feel like I'm controlling the universe at all. At all. I feel like, I'm sort of that infinitely small dot in the infinite small dot. Not insignificant, but not very big in this game. But if you knew left and right, top and bottom, because you sustain it, your fabric sustains the ability and provides the medium by which all emotions are felt. It's like he's the conductive surface that transmits all electricity. He would know where every electron was in that surface. And you take that analogy and you blow it up into everything that can exist. You multiply them all, the possibilities times each other, so you get this infinite equation at the end of the day. Something is holding infinity together. And how could that being have a void like we have voids? How many times have you lived your life and you took a bunch of stuff for granted for a while and then you lose that stuff and you're like, oh my God, I wish I had the ability to have that stuff back. And well, it was really valuable. Can God have that emotion ever? We always argue about the something from nothing formula on the show, as many do on the internet. And the only real solution to that is, right? God's always been there, always will. Okay. I guess that does kind of relieve our pressure of trying to figure out a Big Bang theory that works. Okay. But let's go one step further into that theory, and let's just say that it's true that God cannot cry. He cannot laugh. He is pure left brain logic. It does two things to the mind. One, it makes us sad. If you were to believe in a God and you would think, oh my gosh, if only he knew what love felt like, what a hug felt like. The truth might be that he knows exactly what that feels like, but he feels it constantly. He is always in a state of love, laughter, but he's also crying. He's angry. Seems a little hard to believe, right? Some of these things are just man-made emotions that exist out of, dividing a single holistic feeling, right? There's the great movie Dark Crystal. I mentioned it once on a previous episode, but the idea is that there was a light side and a dark side to this odd species. And they're trying to reunite themselves using this crystal, but the crystal was cracked. And so the dark crystal is what it turned into. And the theory was that the aggressive half, was willing to fight and kill the other half, and the other half is totally peaceful, so they can't fight back. So the dark folks surround the crystal, imbuing it with its darkness, and a little creature called a Gelfling was sent on a mission to repair the crystal, because they're all about to die. And so, I think you can assume by the end of the film, it would have been made had the kid not done that, but they all come together at the very end, and there's something beautiful. And there's no more Skeksis evil dark side. I forgot what the light side's called, but there's no more light. It sort of was a nice monotone voice. It won't hurt anyone. I don't know if it lacks the ability to help. We like to always think that when something's neutral, when it has equal left and right, bright and dark together, that somehow it's still productive. We are sustained in this universe. That's what's really happening. It would appear as if all of life on Earth, as observed, experienced, is embodied, is the same energy. Again, in this show, I keep the soul/spirit a separate energy. Now, we're raised on this planet, if you're religious, at least in the Western world, Christianity-based spin-offs, that sort of thing, you're raised with a lot of fear of God. And the only way you can get your fear to go down of God is to talk to a few perverts in churches and get them to sell you salvation, right? At least there's one church with that problem. And so it's a big control game. It has nothing to do with God or anything like that. So we are raised with that sort of inbred feeling of fearing God, that if we do something wrong, there's somehow a repercussion. I think we can all agree that there's various people in the world that would there'd be lightning storms everywhere. Let's just put it that way, to rid the world of these type of people if there was somehow a direct attribute of repercussion. I think the universe is beautifully designed to self-correct. And so it doesn't happen in an acute lightning bolt. It happens by sheer you steering your ship, right? So part of me has that instinctual old school thought. And I was Catholic and, whatever, since 1 to 8 years old. So they must have got to me early. But the more you love someone or something, you don't want to hurt it. And when it's consciousness that you love, a person, a God, you don't want to hurt their feelings. You don't want to offend them, anger them, disrespect them, deny them. And you, under most circumstances, don't want to be responsible for conceptually handicapping them. And that's sort of what that postulation suggests, is that, oh my gosh, God can't really love me? But what he does is sustain me, and perhaps that is the biggest gift of all. Perhaps love is one-dimensional, and sustaining my existence is all-dimensional. Something is sustaining us. Something is sustaining us. If we're in an infinite container, well, this mass is holding together somehow. And if it's an infinite container with a particulate in it, to study chemistry, it'll diffuse into the medium. I got a glass of water, put a little eyedropper of red dye in there. Right away, you see this beautiful cascading because the dye weighs different than the water. And then you come back an hour later and it's diffused. Now, obviously, some things are heavier than water and sink to the bottom, but the dye experiment's what I'm talking about. If we're in a container, somehow there's a container. I don't know how that would even happen. What contains us? What's on the other side of the container, right? But let's just say the universe is in a container. Well, we don't appear to be a scum on the bottom of the container. We seem to be in some spatial relationship with infinity. But now, why am I going on with this? Why would I be worried about offending a supreme being? Why would it matter how God makes it work? God makes it work. You can absolutely, if you're content with that, then you're a lucky person. When I was young, there were a ton of frontiers out there, things to do that were really cool, and I did a bunch of them. I did almost all of them, that I wanted to do, that I could do. And, of course, opportunities dictated by what's happening in society, et cetera, et cetera. How the economy's doing, what your skill sets are, who you know, all that kind of stuff. But the beautiful thing is when you get done with a bunch of those opportunities and you feel like you really engaged them, you kind of got comfortable in your own skin in different realms, there comes a point where you can just settle down. You just settle down and you start listening and you start smelling those roses, as they say, smelling the flowers, right? And you get into these thought processes. One of my suspicions of why the show is popular with some people is that people are getting there a lot faster because the internet sort of just grinds up reality and spits it out. I think I've weeded out my friends on Facebook down to about 250-something. And I scroll through a home feed generated by 250 people of all ages, of all different walks of life, religious beliefs, what have you. And the amount of swill that's in that feed is unbelievable. You just, when you first get into that whole thing, it's new, you haven't seen a lot of the content, but once it starts going in a loop and, 10 people that don't know each other are posting the same stupid video, and Facebook can't imagine that we want some artificial intelligence to get rid of that fucking problem. You start to feel your soul getting sucked out of your body, which is the feeling of your time's being utterly wasted. Now you might pull your head away from the phone and go, man, I need to do something more productive. And you look around the house, you go, it's nothing to do, so I'll put my Facebook in this thing, right? But once you pull out, once you get out of that equation of allowing things to suck your life away, you'll start to look at the universe in a much deeper sense. Now, some people look at the universe later in life and get spiritual because they feel their mortality and they realize, well, geez, I don't even know what the issues are with mortality. I don't know. Am I supposed to know God? Am I supposed to really? What's the chance of me going to hell? Does that place really exist? My advice is to think all this stuff through when you're young and healthy. Decide what you feel that particular moment when you go in. You're going to be, if you never touch these kind of subjects, you're going to be shocked at first. You'll knee-jerk away or two things. And if you just keep looking at it, you'll start to kind of wiggle in between, right? It's almost like when you snap a rubber band for a while there, it's got a really heavy wave and then it slows down, or a string on a guitar or whatever. But if you end up where I think a lot of you have, which is sort of, we're not religious necessarily. I mean, man-made stories about how the universe, or, who the universe is probably one of the best ways to say it. It starts to kind of not pan out, right? Truth predicts the future, and most of what they say is utter bullshit. Fearing God and God being wrathful. There's one emotion I think God is incapable of feeling would be wrath, because even if God were almost human, but has infinite knowledge, you wouldn't be angry anymore, because there would be no void of knowledge that things were going to happen. Nothing would surprise you, as I say several times on the show. What I have found is this. You will gain a curiosity about a creator, that philosophy, depending on your upbringing and your education. Upbringing refers to whether or not you had a really bad experience in a church and you ended up, feeling like you're in a prison. I think that's what a lot of people feel like when they get inside churches. You're forced to go in on Sunday morning by your parents, who think that they are bringing you closer to God. And in the end, it turns out that you become resentful towards the mandate, right? Your education relates to how you were either indoctrinated, or how you had your mind fed in an open manner, right? So you keep your mind open. Your parents are cool enough not to close the doors on your brain, or it just happens that way, right? And it's perfectly fine and very normal to have it closed and then you open it back up. That's also interesting. But I think that there's a point in all of our lives where we have thought about all the alternative theories of the universe, and we have tested the paradigms and dogma of science when it tries to explain the consciousness of mankind and the utter invisible sustainability of the universe. And we come up with a huge spiritual hole. Imagine that you're made out of apple pie. Okay. And so is the universe. But the scientists in the world are trying to say, well, the universe is made out of cherry pie. And you look at it and you go, well, I think it's made of apple pie. And I have consciousness and I have emotion. If I'm made of the same stuff, which in our case is atomic mass as we understand it to exist, then wouldn't a bunch of me have a consciousness just like a little bit of me should have a bunch of consciousness? And what's the size of the brain in a tiny house spider? What's the size of the brain in an elephant? They're both pretty damn amazing, right? Now, we can't communicate easily with a spider, but they seem to be pretty damn cute sometimes. They seem like they have a little consciousness. When the that one spider that does the dance with his little back feet or whatever the hell, his little fins or whatever, his antenna that look like, ping pong paddles with eyeballs on them. When he does that little dance, you see him on the internet, the little videos where he's doing a dance on a branch trying to woo a woman. Some people say, oh, well, for an insect, it doesn't have any emotional capacity. There's no love there. It's all instinctual programming. But when humans do it, oh my gosh, we're so intellectual. I mean, have you seen the last, romantic movie at the movie theater? A rom-com? What I'm getting at is you will look at the universe and you will find that you are very curious about a creator if you haven't already believed in one. If you've believed in one, you'll get to a point where that definition refines and simplifies over and over and over. And the place that I am personally right now is wondering if I give God credit for all consciousness of all things. If I say God is all colors, God is all sounds, and all at the same time, then it hobbles God, from what man has given him. Just using him as a reference, right? Now we might think, well, maybe God is just a real powerful human-like creature. Pretty hard to believe, right? If we are really in an infinite space, or for the relative distances that we talk about, on Earth, if you think about how big the universe might be when they do those models of how big it is, they're BSing us that they know. Still pretty massive. Galaxy's pretty massive. Solar system's pretty massive. Earth itself's pretty massive. And what's interesting about it is, even if you want to believe we're in some virtual reality inside some computer simulation, and you go, well, it's just that. No, I mean, it's just a matrix, man. Them ones and zeros, it's just like us. Okay. Well, then your argument just got exponentially more interesting, because where's the computer? Where's the headset? Where's the processor? And who created it? And who programmed it? How long have they been testing it? How'd they get it perfect? So why call this episode AI Universe? Because I think as a man, as a human being, I should say, you will get to a point where you will ask the question about God's composition. And I don't think God will be the slightest bit. If God does exist in any capacity, I would imagine that, it would be just as amazing to God to have us question his existence / what he's made out of, and how his relationship is with the universe, and then we can deduce perhaps how we could liaison with him. Is it prayer? Is it something else? Do you even need to pray? Does God just take care of you because you exist? Does he like to have a telegram every once in a while from us at night? Has he read all the telegrams because he lives in all time, all the time, and there's no surprises? I don't think that model would negate needing to contribute to the infinity of time. But who knows, right? I said in the beginning of the episode that I feel, this is just straight gut feeling with really no obviously empirical evidence of any kind other than being in my body. The hippie days when everyone was dropping acid, and you had this collective consciousness of people dropping acid, and it was real acid back in the day, a very interesting thing happened. And just to set this up, that when a bunch of people get together, whether or not they're full of shit or they know what they're talking about, we can hive mind a consciousness together. I've been to several churches in my lifetime. There's different behaviors in different churches, and at first I would walk in the room and, sometimes they put their hands up and sometimes they pray along, and sometimes you're encouraged to shout out stuff while you're doing stuff. And I'd walk in these rooms, either when I was involved with Christianity personally or dating someone whom I love and I want to experience this whole thing with. You kind of feel silly at the beginning, and then you'll find yourself, you won't jump completely, into this, but their behavior starts to feel normal. And then you pop out, you go do a week's worth of whatever, and you go back in on Sunday, and it still feels weird, but a little less weird. And that just keeps going to the point where you adopt a hive mind, right? So in the 60s, everyone's dropping LSD, and again, you have to watch my episode on LSD to really get a full spectrum of what's going on here, but it's really hard to hate things on LSD. Very hard. Now, if you bring a bunch of skeletons to the closet, you should not be taking any drugs of any kind because it just will exacerbate those feelings. As long as you're level-headed and you've kind of dealt with your life and you're in a good, peaceful place, these people found love. And the interesting thing was society was very conservative from the 50s going into the 60s, and so we didn't have the sort of gangster violence that we have now. We didn't have the horrific crap on television. Internet wasn't full of what, 1 billion snuff quick times. Things like Walking Dead, season 7, episode 1 would never be aired on television, probably, or allowed in a movie theater. So life was more simple. People were more pure, and they started dropping acid, and everyone got into the love movement, the peace and love movement, right? And of course, Hollywood has done everything they can to help destroy that movement and chastise it. And we definitely got some bad apples in every bunch. But it's interesting that when freed to travel in a wave of consciousness that was not being controlled by paradigms as much, because paradigms come off as soon as you take LSD, for some of us. And you'll feel them around you, and you can see them in some cases metaphorically, but you can see past them for the first time. And that's why, again, if we made every 18-year-old kid take LSD just the day before they enlist in the military, and say, you still want to enlist in the military when you're done, we would lose over 50% of the applicants right away, which is why that drug had to be pulled off the market, because you see love. The reason I mention this is whether or not we can understand it. I talk about, especially in Creating the Universe episode, us having an energy spectrum. Fast-moving energy is more classified as energy and light and X-rays and all this kind of stuff. And slow-moving energy is this, us, what we can collide with. And then I talk about the soul eventually, and I say I don't believe soul/spirit, that it is made of anything that is based on electrons, right? And so what would it be made out of? What would we call the substance? Whether or not we understand it, how it works, how it collects, what would it be made out of? And I don't mean to sound like a hippie. I don't mean to be terribly existential in my answer or a cop-out. But if we have to pick a name, we're scientists. We have discovered, let's just say we gather everyone's evidence and experience over the last, several thousand years, from literary claims to personal interviews, and we believe there's a spirit to the body, a soul for some. We have to give the substance that makes it a name. I think love is a really good idea, a good name for it. Now let's think about if you were made of pure love and I was made of pure love. You might say, well, I know people that don't love anything. They're criminals. They just are feral beasts, or they're just evil. Okay, I agree. There's people like that. But now what if the game of life, the infinite reincarnated game of life, similar to a carnival game where they have a tent, a machine in the background that has, elephants going by, and you get these little tiny softballs, and you buy 5, and if you can hit all of them down, you get a prize. What if our game is to see how much love we can get our hands on, push through the template of the body, given that body going through a life experience? And because death is probably one of the most profound ways to appreciate love, it's there too. And like I said, we don't want to live forever in one state of consciousness. We need to forget what we've done every once in a while. I mean, let's put it this way. Being a human's pretty cool, but there's rich people all over this world who've been to all 4 corners of this planet that they care to go to. They've done absolutely everything 10 times, and they're bored to death, and they're in their 50s and 60s. But perhaps the game is to find out how much we can experience love. And it has different levels. You're born into loving families. You're born into not loving families. And you have the option to exit your non-loving family and build your own. Perhaps it's not a family love that you're going to attain. It's a self-love. Maybe at one point you just go through and you like Dolce & Gabbana, right? You just love objects. And the lesson you'll learn at the end of that game is that's not probably the quality of love that you're actually interested in. Hey, every life lesson learned, if we truly have a soul / the hard drive in the cloud that remembers the instincts of what you've learned, think about how infinite the spectrum is of what you could put in there. The AI universe also calls out a question of suffering. Would an artificial intelligence, would a robot have anything but an R-factor brain? Just depends. I don't see emotion, again, engaged in how the sun is involved with the solar system. I don't see emotion when it comes to taking a math test. I don't, come to the bottom of an equation and go, oh, because it felt right. Or it makes me happy. When I had the wrong answer, I was sad. With the right answer, I'm happy. That's between you and your teacher. People give you accolades and ridicule you for getting it wrong or right. I do believe that there's a substrate of rules. It is very benign. It has no emotions whatsoever. How that is held in place, man, your guess is as good as mine. Isn't that wild? We know it exists. But even if you try to conceive in your brain of how all those rules are held in place, right? You could take a Cheerio, pull it out of the box, take it in your bedroom where it's not supposed to be, and you can drop it in all four corners of your bedroom. You could carry that Cheerio all the way to the Mount Everest and drop it, and it's going to have physics that are going to talk to it. Forces in the universe, ethereal winds, all that good stuff. It's going to behave the same. And if you took it someplace else in the universe, it's going to behave the same. If you crush it up in your fingers, it's going to float at different gravity levels, but who cares? I once thought of a film idea where we actually had found, for whatever reason, the edge of the universe. And it's sort of just a frayed edge of the inability to actually exist, that mass cannot continue existing past a particular point. And you are forced to diffuse your being right at the edge, and so you're just basically flayed down the middle, like a frayed edge of a rope. There's a little premise for you. If you engage God, something really interesting takes place. As much as you don't want to believe and all this other stuff, and again, even if you're an atheist, I will guarantee you, if there is no God, as defined by most religions on earth as a single being, something's out there. And it can hear you, and it can feed back. Even if you are the only living being on planet Earth, there's something extremely therapeutic and rewarding by, I guess you would say, talking to God. However you want to do that. The one thing I find interesting, if you do happen to establish some sort of one-way communication and spoken word, and you really want to be in a state where you have a very sensitive emotional soul, and I don't mean sensitive as in weak to events around you blubbering all the time. No. But your sensor for emotional changes in your body is very heightened. You can feel changes, right? If you're going to pray to God, talk to God, study that about yourself. And I think what you'll find is when you least expect it, you will get various waves of contribution to your state. You can get a sense of right and wrong if you have a question. You can get a sense of utter confidence if you lack it, and you can get a calmness if you lack it. It's very interesting. My only caveat that saddens me is that there's sort of snake oil salesmen that'll try to step in there and usurp the whole experience and try to tell you what's actually going on. Do your own thing. Let's just say that you're married and you got 10 kids, and you're a good parent, so you're always spending time with your kids. Maybe your parents live with you. Maybe you have like 10 jobs, whatever. my recommendation is to find a place to pray to God. And really, I'm just saying, really talk to Him, where you can be alone. I think talking out loud is very powerful. It's very powerful for your consciousness to hear your own voice. If any of you believe that I have a decent way of communicating, it's in part because I have rehearsed tons of pitches in my lifetime. And, it's not just a business pitch. It's and you talk to someone about an important subject, and so I'll just rehearse how I would approach it. If I'm angry or something, I'll blow off all the steam and say every hideous thing on planet Earth, and then just say, wow, I'm glad I said that to nobody, because that content will never be spoken to another soul. But what will end up happening is, no matter how busy you are in your life, you will eventually achieve a state of solitary communication with God that is interesting. You'll be in this consciousness where you are kind of encapsulated in this quiet room. And if, my rule with this type of communication is, my brain, whoever sustains the universe knows all. So my form of communication is always from the perspective of, no matter how much I would like to keep a personal fact about myself concealed or something, which I don't have much of that, but, whatever. You could be just thinking a really dark thought at one point because you're frustrated about something and it's darker than you ever normally think, and you just, you can always talk it out. Now, obviously, with all the listening devices, maybe you want to think certain things and talk certain things differently. But I do suspect that one of the subroutines of this universe, as it relates to law of attraction, could go a little bit a step further, which is perhaps our thoughts and dreams imagineer the universe right in front of us. If the universe was built out of everything that could possibly happen, then your willingness to want to be in a particular destination second to second is that you're hanging on to the steering wheel. So if you start to will yourself into good-natured situations, you'll find those. Which is why I think karma is sort of a word that we use to describe someone who knows they've done wrong to other people, fear the reprisals of those events, and they merely steer themselves into the reprisal. And that's why revenge for some people never comes fast enough, but eventually it arrives for those that have hurt them. And again, that's why I think an apology derails the guilt. If there's something you can't apologize for and feel remorse for, it derails this self-sabotage if you're in a negative spin. And I think just being kind every day and giving and sharing is why you get back what you put out. I know you feel me on a lot of this stuff. This is a very esoteric episode, but there's a lot of you that really dig this sort of conversation. And the more it is hard to grasp, the more intangible some of these concepts are. It's where a lot of us get to a point where we like to hear other people's thoughts. This is all a baton race. Enlightenment is a baton race of mammoth proportions. And it's almost as if, a normal baton race is you have probably 4 people in the connection. You run the baton around one lap, give it to the person, it runs it around 4 times, right? This baton race looks like a marathon of all living beings in the universe. And we've simply picked a width to our line, handed out batons, and every being is in front. And you know what? In fact, we're all just running together in a big pile. We run until we just find someone who's stationary, and we hand it off to that person. They run as far as they can in a random direction. It's not even in a course. And we're running in all dimensions. And so the beautiful thing about the internet for mankind is I think it is turning on a consciousness that perhaps has never been turned on before. Perhaps it's only been turned on in Greek universities or Egyptian universities. Who knows, right? University is named after universe. The Egyptians had 40 plus years of universe school. And it ended up being called the university. We're in universe school right now. All of us, right? So I know you feel me. If you dig this particular episode, please give me a thumbs up. If you dig this whole show, give me a subscribe. Let's just put that. Give me a subscription. Realize it's a variety show. The main domain is deepthoughtsradio.com. You can get all the feeds from there. I do have a Facebook page, which is facebook.com/deepthoughtsradio. A lot of you are going over to MK Ultra Radio Facebook page. That's a completely different thing, completely different set of editors, and it's really political, and it favors various biases. So Deep Thoughts is a completely different thing, just so you know. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you soon. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.